Well, good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful, sunny, cold day here in Santa Barbara. We had a little rain over the last couple days, less than we had hoped for. Plants did like it, but shame we didn't have more. And it's very cold here right now. Okay, let me jump right in. So, this deep dive is on the denial literature that we've looked at. Why scientists disagree about global warming, which of course they don't, but that's the title of the book. Yeah, a few general remarks to begin with. A number of people in the comments noted that they found this material even more depressing than the first 2 weeks. And I mean, the denial material, both this book and the documentary that you watched. And the reason for that, I think, is that, it's one thing to know what's happening both globally, which we did in week one, and more locally, which we did in week two. But it's another thing altogether to know that, okay, we have this huge problem. We have to address this as a species. We have to figure out how to handle this, which we can. But there are powerful forces in the world who are, trying to stop us from acting on it and denying that it's real. So it's sort of like Greta Thunberg, right? Greta Thunberg's great, sort of tagline, which is "Our house is on fire." Greta Thunberg, yeah, fully content to be an alarmist, is running around saying, "Our house is on fire, our house is on fire, look, our house is on fire." And then you have this group of climate change deniers saying, "Nah, it's not." And, but look, the house is on fire. You can see it. People are dying. Did you see what happened in Paradise, California? Yeah, nah, we're not buying that. That's natural. There have always been wildfires. There have always been hurricanes. There's always been warm weather, cold weather. I mean, we're not buying it. And that's pretty frustrating because that group of people are enormously influential. And really what it comes down to is the fossil fuel companies, and specifically, really, well, more general to the fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel affiliates. But more than any one group of those would be the oil companies. These are companies that are enormously, almost mind-bogglingly wealthy. They are among the wealthiest companies on the planet. I said countries by mistake there, but they are wealthier than many countries. To put their wealth in perspective, if you were to get the poorest half of humanity, 3.75 billion people from, low to moderate income countries and poor, people without a lot of money, even in the U.S., if you put all of them in a room, it'd be a big room, but if you could do it, almost 4 billion people, how many companies do you think it would take to equal their wealth? And would it be 100, 200, 300, or whatever? No. The poorest 3 billion people, the poorest 3.75 billion people actually have less money combined than the top two fossil fuel companies. Two companies have more money than half of humanity. They've aggregated that money because we've had a fossil fuel economy for a couple hundred years now. That's what fueled the Industrial Revolution. That's what fueled the 20th century. Oil fueled most of it. Just to be clear, fossil fuels are used for different things. So principally, when we started using them, we were using coal, was used for like heating, things like that, industrial processes, so, fuel factories and all. Then for transportation with trains, things like that. And finally, to produce electricity, which is the primary thing that we still use coal for. Oil, however, which really comes on the scene at the end of the 19th century, fuels transportation in a huge way. It fuels the automobile. It fuels, all sorts of transportation like buses, and it takes over, obviously, from coal for trains and things of that sort. And ships, everything. It kind of fuels the planet that way. It's not really used to produce electricity, but that's where natural gas comes on the scene, which which does come on the scene in the 20th century, that fuels things like power plants to produce electricity. It's cleaner, generally speaking, than coal. Also, we use it for heating. Your house may well have gas heating, and we use it for like cooking and all too. But oil is where really so much wealth has been aggregated. And the problem is this industry, the fossil fuel industry, is not content with going away, but it has to go away. Scientists now know that we have to leave the bulk of the fossil fuels that we have unextracted. We have to leave them in the ground. These companies need to go away. You could say the same thing, which is why we see in the film Merchants of Doubt, the tobacco industry, because the tobacco industry was in the same situation. They were doing something that had to go away. And you would hope, once they realized that they were selling this, addictive poison, that they would have stopped. You would hope that the fossil fuel industry, once they realized what they were doing was harming the planet and making it difficult for our species to live here, that they would stop. It's a no-brainer that they would stop, right? But they haven't. The tobacco industry still hasn't, and wouldn't have even slowed down if we hadn't put legislation in place to stop them. The fossil fuel industry is not only not going away, they're fighting all that they can to keep going. And they're doing this by getting influence in Washington and all over the planet where they can, but especially here in the U.S. That's by, paying, Congress people on all huge amounts of money. And, they've been very successful. They've had, a climate change denier actually in the presidency who, made radical changes to our environmental policy as a consequence. So they also work by trying to convince the public that it's the wrong way of putting it, trying to raise doubt in the minds of the public that there is a problem, and trying to, delay as long as possible us stopping them from doing what they're doing, and switching to renewables instead. And they're pretty successful in what they do, by the way, because, we now know that a large portion of Americans, are experiencing a sense of real sorry, I had to fiddle with my controls here for a minute. Anyhow, they've been very successful. And you can see something like the book, why scientists disagree about global warming, as a good example, and hopefully it was a good example of how they're doing what they're doing. I have to tell you, when I first started looking at this problem a few years ago, and it was natural for me to do so, even though people weren't. And what I mean by that is, I'm specialist in the written word and rhetoric, how people convince people by way of speech and text and the different approaches that they have. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is literature of a sort, right? Why not look at how this literature functions? Even though I thought that denial literature would be, and I'm trying to think how to put it in a nice way. Well, I just thought it was going to be stupid. I mean, honestly, I thought that it was going to be, because how could it not be? Because it was denying this incredible reality. But it's not stupid, and the people who are putting it together are not stupid. They are actually very smart, and the techniques they're employing are very clever, and they're very successful at it. And they're being paid a fortune by the fossil fuel industry to do it in the tune of. One study not too long ago found out that each fossil fuel company, and there are quite a few of them, each oil company rather, was spending about $28 million a year on it. But we know the groups like the Koch brothers and all are spending even more than that. So, very successful. But the interesting thing about it, and I don't want to get to the comments, is that it's all very different, that literature, and having looked at a lot of it. And what I mean is some of it is arguing one thing, some of it is saying the climate crisis isn't happening at all. Others are arguing, it's happening, but it's not severe. And if you tried to get consensus among them, you just wouldn't get it. And that very fact could kind of alert you to the idea that well, maybe there isn't anything to it because they don't agree on one, theory. If they all agreed that climate crisis was being caused by natural occurrences, which some of them do, then maybe they'd be more credible, but they're not. And yet still they're credible because in these different, to some people, in these different ways, they're raising doubt here and there. And that doubt would be sufficient, and this is the hope of the fossil fuel company and affiliates, that doubt would be sufficient to keep us from acting. Anyhow, a few things to note. There are different varieties of denial literature, and for sure. On the one extreme, we have people who are just out and out denying that anything is happening at all. That temperature is rising, they're denying that there anything that's happening is, out of the ordinary. And one of the ways they're doing that, for example, and would be an example of how the fossil fuel companies work. And by the way, if you haven't seen them, if you watch Climate of Doubt and Merchants of Doubt, you know that the fossil fuel companies are funneling their money through other organizations, and that money is then going to things like the Heartland Institute, where it goes to people directly. So one of the I think it's the Heartland Institute, one of their projects was funding a particular project at a website called What's Up With That. That's WATTS, like the unit of electrical measurement. Like, you have a hairdryer is 1,000 watts or whatever. It's actually the guy's name who runs it. And I think he claims it's the most visited of all climate change websites. He may be right, I'm not sure. But he received a $90,000 grant from a conservative think tank to do a project. $90,000 is a lot of money for what he did. And that is, there are all over the planet, and a lot of them in the U.S., in major cities and near major cities, temperature outposts, basically thermometers where temperature has been tracked since the 1880s or before by a range of meteorological groups and climate groups like NOAA and all. So what this guy did was to crowdsource this by way of his website, since it's so well popular, and had people all over the United States, climate change skeptics and outright deniers, go look at these temperature outposts, thermometers, and see what was going on. And he knew where they were because it's public knowledge, and he was able to get a map, and he put the map up on the website, and people look, and they took photographs. And what the best ones, the ones he put on his website, showed that these were in a sense of great disrepair, and further, that many of them were in areas that had become urban in the last 140 years. They then this was actually in support of a theory that they called urban heat islands. And the idea here is simple. In the last 140 years, since like the 1880s, these thermometers have been sitting there, but around them, these cities have developed, and the cities have put a lot more blacktop in, a lot more buildings, and we know that, cities are warmer than the surrounding areas because of all that thermal mass and all, and they just soak up heat very differently than would, say, a forest. And the argument is, well, the temperature's not really rising on the planet at all. It's these urban heat islands that have been increasing around the thermometers. And yes, the recordings say that the temperature is going up, but it's not because the globe is warming at all. It's because these cities are warming. Well, as you may imagine, the IPCC, who studies climate change and all, looked at that, have looked at it, have compensated for it. And furthermore, it's, the issue is principally that now we are using satellite data, and the primary increase in temperatures, I noted in my Climate and Generation lectures, have been during my lifetime, and satellites have been up there tracking weather since my lifetime, during my lifetime, So it's kind of hooey. It is hooey, but it is convincing to a lot of people. So that's one extreme, denying that the temperature is even going up and denying those readings. Other people will say that, well, yeah, temperature is going up, but that's a natural thing. It's not human beings, right? Temperature has always varied across the planet. We had ice ages, we had warm periods. Who's to say this is just not a natural occurrence? Well, by the way, we know that that's not true because we have a theory, a good theory, regarding the way CO2 and other greenhouse gases work. And we know that if you added them to the atmosphere, it should increase the temperature of the planet. And it has increased it just that amount. And it's worked like clockwork with the theories. In other words, it'd be like saying, if you put a pot of water on the stove and you wanted it to boil and you turn the gas up next to it, you have a theory that it's going to take a certain amount of time for that to boil because you're putting it, however many kelvins of heat there by way of the gas flame. That theory works rather perfectly, actually. But people could argue something like, well, yeah, but if there are pots on the stove around it, maybe that heat is transferring over. Well, maybe, but scientists have a very clear understanding of how that works, and we know exactly, we can calculate, we can predict how well that works, and that's the theory, and the theory, can predict it. The theory we have has predicted why temperature has gone up since 1880 solely as a function of greenhouse gases, or largely as a function of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that's why, we have to believe it. And by the way, when temperatures have gone up and down over the, millions of years, well, they've been very slow, nothing like what we've had, or a degree of 1 degree Celsius of temperature rise in, 100 years. That's many, 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 many times faster than those, cycles work in nature. Anyhow, that's another argument. Other people will argue that, okay, it is going up and it is happening by human beings, but it's just a lot less, than we think it is. The scientists are these alarmists and all. It's not going to be a big deal. In fact, it's probably going to help the planet in some ways because it'll get warmer in places like, the boreal forest in upper Canada and Siberia and all, and we'll be able to grow crops up there and so on and so on and so on. Yeah, and then there are other people who argue that, yes, it's happening, and yes, it's kind of bad, but we just can't stop it. It would destroy our economy to stop it. And there's another group that aren't deniers, and in fact, this word came into play only pretty recently because of AOC, and she coined, I'm not sure if she coined the word, she may well have, climate delayers, and not climate deniers, but delayers. And delayers are people who, in fact, it was this reference, I think, to Dianne Feinstein, who was, a congressperson from California, who Feinstein said, look, yeah, okay, sure, it's happening, it's bad, I totally believe it, I'm totally 100% behind you, but we just can't act quickly. It's going to be too hard, we're not going to get it through government, we have too many forces opposing us, it's just a reality that we're going to have to delay action on it. And all these groups, all of them, including delayers, they make the fossil fuel companies very happy, I would imagine, because as long as you're delaying or not doing something or not doing enough, it lets them continue doing what they're doing, which is, reaping profits, and they want to reap profits every year. I know it's a very sad way of looking at the thing, saying it's all about profit, but, well, there you are. Okay. I've spent almost 20 minutes talking, but I want to get to the comments because they're a great set of comments this week. So let me jump to those right now. Okay, here we are. Yeah. This person introduces an important idea that I think we need to talk about, which is confirmation bias here. So this is just when your bias is confirmed. So what do I mean by that? Well, think of it this way. So imagine you are a denier. You don't believe the climate crisis is real. Someone hands you 5 articles or 5 books, and 4 of the 5 say, no, it absolutely is real. We have all the supporting evidence. This is it. And you read them. And then you read the 5th one, and the 5th one is what you believe in, and that is climate change isn't happening. It confirms what you believe in. It confirms your bias. There's an actual psychology at work here, confirmation bias, which suggests that, yeah, even after reading 4 works and said the opposite thing, you would believe the one that said what you believe. It confirmed your bias. It confirmed what you believed. And that's an absolute thing. So if you think about it from the point of view of people generating this literature, you want to put literature out there because people are receptive to it. A certain group of people are receptive. And, why they're receptive, that can be a complicated issue. It can just be that they're in denial, in another sense of denial than we just talked about, but denial in the sense of like in denial of the reality of it. People, if they have a problem, and people have equated this to an addiction, and you have a problem with the substance you can't imagine life without, someone hands you basically a lifeline saying, there is no problem here. You don't have a problem. What are you people are talking about? Those other 4 books, that's hooey. They're probably, on the take or something, and they're being paid money to say that. Don't believe it at all. You don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. It's all good. Yeah. Confirmation bias predisposes you to like that message and like that message a lot. It's just the psychology of us human beings. And the interesting thing that's noteworthy here is that, going back to my original suspicion that this was all just pretty stupid, it's not stupid. These people are smart. They know how your mind works. They're using confirmation bias to their advantage. This book that you read, or you're at the beginning of it, confirms that, confirms things that you thought at the very beginning and all. It's designed that way. So it's why this, people know that this is especially depressing, this material, is, here are these people that have more money than anyone. They have more money than half the planet by a long shot. And, they're using, portions of that money to try to convince you to let them destroy our planet. And they're good at it. They're smart. So, yeah. Okay. Yep. It's a malicious but successful attempt at creating doubt and confusion in the public eye about whether climate change is a pertinent issue. And this person, because I've talked about this in creating doubt, and again, that's the theme of this week, doubt. That's why we have these 2 documentaries, Merchants of Doubt, Climate of Doubt. But this person, has it right here. The goal of the Heartland Institute, you could say the fossil fuel industry, is this: to cause hesitancy. The longer people feel the climate science is still disputed, the longer that people will wait to take action, the longer that the fossil fuel affiliates can continue to frack, drill, and destroy our Earth for money. It's often said that liberals have politicized climate change, and that would be by the fossil fuel economy, but it's quite the opposite. Conservatives have forced another side to climate change to avoid taxes and allow for an expanding free market. Well, I don't know that I could have said it better myself. It is to cause hesitancy here. It is to make people, not sure about whether the climate crisis is real, so that the companies can, to use this person's words, frack, drill, and destroy our Earth for money. And it's very sad to think of it that way. It would be so much better if there were a good reason for it, but now that renewables are on the scene, now that the fossil fuel industry has a real competitor, which they didn't have really 100 years ago. We didn't have, when we were producing electricity, in the 1920s and electrifying this country, for example, we didn't really have many other options. But it wasn't too long. 50 years later, we had other options, good ones. Photovoltaic solar was on the scene and practical, and people, were putting it on their houses. Wind power was practical. So that is now the case that it has a competitor, the fossil fuel industry, but it does not, it's just like any other competitor in any other business. It wants to win out over its competitor, and it wants to keep its competitor, renewables, from succeeding. But, from our point of view, it's not about business, it's not about money, it's about the planet. We have to keep that from happening. Anyhow, let me go to the next comment. This person noted that this, reading was more scary than any other. It scared me because of how well worded and convincing it was. People have no knowledge on climate change and global warming might read this book and think that it's not actually a big deal. well, that's the goal if they can do it. So well put here. When in reality, it's the biggest problems humans face. This information presented in the text is so convincing in arguing against climate change that I can't safely say that even if I had no knowledge about the climate crisis, I wouldn't believe in it. So I think this is the issue here, that one of the reasons I gave it to you is to make clear that it's convincing stuff. I mean, I don't feel bad if you read it and at times you were, if not convinced, shaken in your resolve. In other words, a lot of people put a good deal of faith in this comment, in this study that's coming out of Naomi Oreskes and others, that the overwhelming scientists on the planet, the people who know about this problem, the overwhelming amount, 97 or more %, believe that it's real. So if you believe in science and you think that science works, and, hey, we do, because it works in our lives everywhere. If you don't believe in science, you're going to have trouble coming to grips with your smartphone, because that's nothing but a whole slew of applied science. So if you believe in it, then, and you believe that they believe in it and that they're saying it's a big deal and we have to worry about it. Okay, good. I'm in. I get it. But this article, or the beginning of this book, does such a good job of trying to kick that out from under you, trying to say, well, that's not really true at all. Let's look at that. I mean, it's put together by this person, Naomi Oreskes. And if you didn't notice the little things in here, just this peppered through. So at one point they refer to Naomi Oreskes, and she was a professor, by the way, in the UC here at UC San Diego, and has since moved to Harvard. But, they just throw in there, instead of Professor Oreskes or Historian Oreskes or Scholar Naomi Oreskes or something, Socialist Naomi Oreskes, to make clear that, her agenda is a political one rather than anything else. But anyhow, this person's comment, I think, is squarely on the mark, that it is frightening, because if, someone, read this, it could shake their confidence. And again, this was sent out initially to 50,000 policymakers, politicians, and then sent out to 300,000, teachers, principally high school teachers, to do just that, to confuse them. And, 300,000 people is a lot of people, but hey, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because, how many students do 300,000 teachers teach every year? So this is literally going to be influencing millions of children every year, and, confusing them, when we should be just doing just the opposite, which people further note in the comments here. We should, obviously educating children to the problem. So, this brings me to a more serious point. And by the way, all these, of course, I've just sort of taken out of sometimes larger comments. As ludicrous as this book may seem to me and to many of people in the class, and I think a lot of people would, it seems to have convinced and reinforced the views of a lot of climate science deniers, especially judging from recent Amazon comments. Yeah, so the reason I had you read the Amazon comments was, to give you comments other than our class, right? So if you're going through, you watch my little video, and then you see what everybody's saying, people, because you're in this class, because you're UCSB students, because, you just know, you have a certain perspective on it. But go to Amazon and you'll see the comments there. Some people really praise this book. And also it makes clear, incidentally, that there's a very active online community of climate change deniers, which probably comes as no surprise to you. But these are people, as far as I can figure, are not, being paid by the fossil fuel company directly. It's just that they've bought all this hook, line, and sinker, and it confirms what they believe. And as a consequence, they're sort of foot soldiers here that and what they can do, and what I mean by that is they may not be able to publish a book, but they can go ahead and make comments, and they can be active at doing it. So here's a positive thing that here's something that they reviewed positively. Go like to one of Al Gore's books or something, to Michael Mann's book. I haven't looked. Michael Mann is a climate scientist, just has a new book that came out a couple of weeks ago. I am sure that they are already attacking him in the reviews, and that's actually a very effective technique, by the way. And again, the kind of things that these folks do or know to do. What I mean by that is there have been studies that how important comments are with like articles, and also you read an article. Most people don't finish the article by a long shot before they jump down to the comments. Many people read more of the comments than they read of articles. And they've discovered that if someone gets there first with a comment and they word it in a very emotionally charged way, that will impact how many people think of every subsequent comment. So in other words, the first comment is, that person's such an idiot. I can't believe this thing. It looks like it was written in crayon or something. It's so silly. Well, if you read that, that will impact how you think of the rest. And that's why this denial community is there commenting right and left wherever they can, and whether it's in a newspaper article, whether it's in an Amazon review. Yeah, so it's fascinating to think and demoralizing to think that there's this broad community out there doing everything they can to support the fossil fuel industry. Yeah, so yep. Yeah. Having a little drink of my tea here while you're reading this. Yeah, this is an issue. And I mentioned here, so what this person, of course, is talking about is legislation in support of climate change skepticism. Person notes it's a major issue. How can the burden of responsibility of climate change fall on a younger generation when they are being taught that the reality is that there isn't an issue at all? How will any change be made? We are responsible, but if it is instilled in us that this isn't an issue, no change will be made, and the effects will only continue to increase exponentially as time goes on. Then comes the question: when will we finally realize that anthropogenic climate change is real and has been happening for decades, and finally make lasting global change? Yeah. Well said. Remarkably well said. The fact is, the fossil fuel industry is, just to be very clear, doing a multiple-prong approach here. So we're looking at the literature that they create, which is directed at the public. This is a great example of it. But they also are funneling lots of money, many, many millions of dollars, to influence politicians by donating to their to their re-election campaigns and all. And as this, consequence, politicians are, people would say, are bought and paid for by a fossil fuel industry, or certainly have an obligation to them, or a perceived one. So they're also getting politicians in to pass laws. So if you want to influence, for example, children, and if you want to influence the next generation, how do you go about it? Well, here we have an example of this book. Get their teachers teaching them what you want them to be taught. Alternately, put politicians into office that will try to make laws requiring teachers to actually teach this, or to teach it side by side with other material. And you may know that there have been precedents for this, right, in sort of, I don't know how to put it, but sort of reaction to science. And what I mean by that is, there are states in the United States where in school you can teach the theory of evolution, but you also have to teach that there is another theory too, and that is the theory of creationism. These are required by law to be taught to every student as two viable theories. Put it that way. The goal here would be, if these politicians were to get their way, to have both climate change being taught and the fact that, people disagree with climate change. And that would actually be taught to every child. Now, what would they ultimately conclude? I think the goal is they would be in doubt, right? You have two theories. Which one is real? They both sound real. You have a teacher up in front of the room saying, well, there are two theories, just so you know, there are two theories. It'd be like there being, two theories about anything, about, we have like multiple theories about, I guess we did until recently, what would happen at the end of the universe? Would the universe keep expanding, not expand and all? And you have like different theories. And I think, well, better example, sorry, that wasn't a good one. Is there a universe now, or is there a multiverse, right? People are debating this. We have two theories, and, I don't know enough about that to know if there's, a single universe or a multiverse. I would have to say, well, that sounds interesting and confusing. I can't tell you what it is. And I think that's what the position they would want children to be in, that they couldn't tell you what it is. That they would just be confused. Yeah, great point. Okay. Hold on, I'm going to shift back here again. I have a... here it is. Sorry. I'm playing with a little thing I have here. And now I am switching. So I have a little switcher, and it's a little separate keypad, and it wasn't doing what it was supposed to. But now I can go and click over to this. And we can look at this. And okay, let's go down. I will admit it, the people in this book have some pretty snazzy titles, like Marta Tanoon, Executive Director of Citizens Alliance for Responsible Energy. If I didn't have a preconceived idea of what I was going to be reading in this book, I might have thought she would be an advocate for responsible, renewable energy. But alas, no. Yes, well, that's exactly what that's supposed to sound like. Citizens Alliance for Responsible Energy. And that she would be, someone who you could rely on. You saw in the film Merchants of Doubt, with the group that was for fireproofing material for, furniture and all. They sound like very real groups. They have online presences that look very real. This is all in an effort to confuse you and to draw, to raise doubt. In other words, you look at a group like that and think, wow, this person is an advocate for responsible energy. This looks like a big deal. Well, probably not to you if you put your mind to it and started researching a little. And, many folks looked at this text and they started looking at the footnotes, and they found that like over half the footnotes were to publications from the Heartland Institute. And, people saw through it. But a lot of people are not going to see through it. And that's the hope here. That's why they go to the trouble of making up these organizations and making them sound incredible. It's pretty criminal, really, this is like a con game going on. It'd be like someone trying to get your money, to donate money online and creating a fake organization that sounded really good. That would be a crime, it would seem to me. That would be a con. And this is like a con. And it's so fascinating that it's going on, and you have this major industry, the fossil fuel industry, resorting to doing this kind of stuff or supporting this kind of stuff being done. It's just altogether remarkable. So yeah, okay, yep. This person notes, and a number of people made comments of this type, and I thought they were really interesting. I mean, I found them fascinating because this person talked about what they actually learned in high school regarding the climate crisis. So, there was a study that came out 3 or 4 years ago that noted that a third of all high school teachers are teaching climate change skepticism, which is remarkable, really. But that's just a figure, a statistic. I mean, first off, I believe it. I think there was a Pew study. It was credible and all, but what's fascinating to me is this class, we have, 1,000 people who were, for the most part, in high school 3 or 4 years ago. And, people were reporting here to us in the comments just what they actually learned about the climate crisis. And some people noted that they had, great background in it, and they had like an AP class, and it was covered in detail and terrific. But other people noted things like this. Just about the only thing about learning that I know about learning that was not even attributed to climate change in my K-12 education was acid rain, and was only caused in my class was learning about, the only cause in class was learning about rain cycle. Yeah, so that's a great example that the climate change crisis wasn't even being taught at all in this person's class, and the only thing at all is acid rain, which is related to the fossil fuel. And another thing the fossil fuel industry does, which is, if you burn fossil fuels and you don't, pull things out of them like sulfur dioxide, it will come back to Earth as acid rain. But that's not the cause of the climate crisis. That causes another environmental problem, a significant and important one that we have been addressing. But yeah, it makes me wonder why there is nothing being taught about this subject. Just like you experienced, this person's making a comment to another. We similarly had meetings in school featuring songs about reducing, reusing, and recycling, but that was about the extent to which we learned anything relating to our environment and the possible negative effects of climate change. Could have even been through it, only implied but never told. Yeah, that's another interesting point here. I'll just finish this until I pop back on screen. Maybe I'm reaching here, but it does make me wonder just who is setting the curriculum standards for my school, if there are people who can make false claims and roll with them until their grave. Who is to say these folks are not the same ones conditioning entire new generation to do the same? Yeah, a number of great points here. And one which I note is an issue, and I've talked about it in some of the previous lectures, but I'm just going to repeat it briefly here. The fossil fuel industries want nothing, or are very happy, I think, when we start taking on the responsibility for everything ourselves. And then we start blaming each other for not taking on the responsibility. So an example would be like recycling. That's what we have to do as people. We have to recycle. We have to make sure you clean your jars and put them in the right containers and all. With people who aren't recycling, we get angry at them since we're putting in the work and they're not. And probably a more direct example, which is kind of a hot issue in some ways, would be eating a largely plant-based diet. You feel that, okay, if we're going to solve this problem, I can solve it myself. I can eat a largely plant-based diet. First off, I agree. Good thing. I eat a largely plant-based diet. I mentioned before I was vegan for 5 years. But then we start complaining about people who don't, and people get bickering, and you get angry at people who are, eating steak every night or on the Atkins or paleo diet or whatever. Nothing makes the fossil fuel companies happier than that, or presumably would. And why I say that is because it makes it our fault, our problem, and for us to come up with solutions with them. And when you learn in school about the things you're supposed to do, like this person note, reducing, reusing, and recycling, that's just great because it leaves them alone and doesn't put any responsibility on them, puts it on us, gets us bickering back and forth. They have to stand back and smile with that, because the one thing it's not doing is in any way inhibiting them from doing what they're doing, or even talking about what they're doing, or the impact of what they're doing with the climate crisis. So you really do have to wonder with this person about, why is that all that's being taught in schools? And that's, not even the climate crisis directly. And as so many people have noted here, this is the biggest issue of the 21st century. It absolutely will be. I mean, like COVID is a big thing now, racial justice issues, social inequality. These are huge, huge, huge issues. I don't disagree with any of that. But the climate crisis is going to impact everyone in a profound way. And it's related to all those anyhow. But yeah, so it does raise a great question why this isn't being taught and needs to be taught. And, should be taught at the UC too. As I've noticed before, and you're probably going to note again, a number of people in the UC, including me, have been, arguing for a long time that it's the obligation of the UC to teach this, that every student coming through the door should have a course like this one. And it's why I teach a big course for that reason, because I want as many people to get the message as possible. But we should require it, and we should require this at high school level and all too. But that's just my particular rant on this. So, okay, let's jump back down. Yeah, this person nicely breaks down what the article did, and I thought this is a very useful breakdown. One, attacking the personal credibility of the scientists. It's a fascinating approach, right? So it's not attacking the science here. It's not disagreeing with the science in this regard, but attacking the scientists. And we're going to see that again and again, and suggesting that they have, improper motivation, that they're in it for the money, or that they're socialists, and that they're trying to, put that agenda forth. Yep. Vapid arguments, that's a quote. The authors largely attack the methodology of the climate scientists. So when they're not just attacking them personally, which is a major part of the attack, then they attack the science, the methodology. But this person is so right in that they have no counter methodology. In other words, even though there are people with actual PhDs like Fred Singer, he's one of the general editors for this book, they don't have a credible counter theory. None of them are research scientists. So it's not like they actually have, done research and conducted analysis and all of it. They don't have any real credible theory. Some of them have like thought experiments and saying, well, this happened, climate's been changing for the last few thousand years. It's changing now. Okay, yeah, I can say that too. But I mean, where's your lab work to back that up? Where is there anything to prove it? And then straw man arguments. The authors frequently misstate the research of the scientists, selectively quoting certain excerpts in the research papers to prove their point. Another really good point. So the straw man argument, they just throw out things that are easily attacked. It's a good way to think about this, and I think those three things are really important. But beyond that, in a more general way, this book is using a lot of techniques. Confirmation bias, we talked about at the very beginning today. These three things, it's using a lot of things. And that's why I said, to dismiss this as just being silly or I think that would be a big mistake. These people are clever in what they're doing, and they're coming at it again and again and again. Yeah. Another comment. Interesting one. Yep. This is a comment a number of people made similar ones. I disagree with both the methodologies used by the Heartland Institute and the IPCC. Both of these organizations have turned climate change from purely a scientific issue to a political one. I do believe in climate change and the climate crisis as a whole, and while I have no doubt that human actions are exacerbating such issues, it's still important to look at climate change from all the angles. That, I think, is a comment that the authors of this book would like to hear, in that it is suggesting that this has two sides to it, this issue. Well, for a long time, we sort of mandated that we look at both sides of the issue. So there's this idea that I'm stumbling on my words here. The FCC, back when television was coming on the scene, was very concerned that you would have, because you only had three major networks back then. There was PBS, but that was mainly it. So like three news shows and three networks. They were very concerned that if someone were in control of these networks, that they could control, influence a large portion of the American public. Let's say someone was, one political Democrat or Republican and, owned a TV station, a network. They could go ahead and use that as a way of convincing people to either, whatever their political position was. And so the FCC came up with something called the Fairness Doctrine. And what the Fairness Doctrine said is, if you're going to talk about something, if you're going to get someone up there, a Republican saying that we should do away with taxes for X and X reason, fine. But in fairness, you need then to get a Democrat get up there and saying, no, we shouldn't get rid of these taxes for whatever reason. And both sides had to have their say. And that continued for a long time, the actual Fairness Doctrine. It's not around anymore, but it continues in spirit, in that up until very recently, if you'd turn on, CNN or any place, you'd have a scientist speaking about the real, impact of the climate crisis, and then a denier, and you saw them in the videos. And as a consequence, it made people think that both sides were valid, that we should look at it from both positions. But there is no other position, that it's only been created that there's this other view. Scientists are in complete agreement. That's why a number of scientists stopped a few years ago, not that long ago, really, I think 5-7 years ago, said they're just not going to do it anymore. They're not going to go on these TV shows and sit there and debate with some other, would-be, pseudoscientists that the climate change is real. It simply is real, and they're not going to make a spectacle, making the American public thinking there are two sides to it. Because again, in the bigger picture of raising doubt, that works perfectly. It looks like there are two sides. So I think when a work like this can, seem like it's it's good to look at both sides of every issue. I mean, I'm in favor of that. I mean, to look at everything. But you have to realize with this issue, that other side, the other science, the other, these organizations, all of it, they're all made up. It's all made up. And all these different theories they have that it's caused by, sunspot activities, which is a theory that they've put forth. There's no theory there. No one's ever done any research there. There's nothing really to prove it. I mean, no significant research. It's just, something that's being thrown out there to, again, confuse the public. Yeah. Let's jump to the next comment. Yeah. They note here that the book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, quotes from like the Wall Street Journal and uses academic language and makes it seem credible. They do that a lot. They quote things that seem credible. A note here, though, I'm going to scroll down and give you a little excerpt from an article in Current Affairs, which is just from 2019. Yeah. First off, the Wall Street Journal is sort of the spokesperson for American industry, right? They're you compare it like to the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times. They're a conservative news outlet. I mean, not in the same way that's kind of been reinvented with like Fox News, but in the traditional way, they're conservative. And, nonetheless, their reporters are among the best in the country. And I think that's absolutely right, reflecting a common pattern among the business press, which is written for executives, investors, and managers who need reasonably accurate information in order to run the corporate economy. So, look, that's right. And in other words, I agree with that the Wall Street Journal does have good reporters, and they are going to be accurate because the people reading it, the corporate executives and investors, they want to know what's the reality. So they don't want to be told that solar cells are just not, competitive with coal and we shouldn't think about them at all. They want to know the fact that solar is actually very competitive with coal because they need to think about long and hard about how they're investing their money. So they want the real facts. But the Current Affairs article noted here, however, its op-eds page is essentially Fox News with AP English and its long tradition of climate denial and more recently fatalism. Yeah, so the point here is that even though you may read what looks like a very credible source, like the Wall Street Journal, which, even though it has a certain conservative bias, still tends to be very accurate with very good journalists. But they're publishing things in their op-ed section. And if you don't know how an op-ed works, an op-ed anyone can publish. It's people who send in a very short article, like 500 to 1,000 words, and it's an opinion. It's your opinion. And if they like it, they publish it. And they publish all sorts of climate change denial pieces in their op-ed section, and more recently fatalism, and that's the notion. So we've talked about climate change denial, we've talked about delay, but fatalism it's just too big. And, it's in our economy. We have a fossil fuel economy. There's nothing can be done. This is going to happen. Don't try to, we can't try to change anything. It's done. It's done. There's no way to change it. That's a very fatalistic view, and one that I, hold just the opposite view, because I think we absolutely can change and we have to change. And if you get to that fatalist position, by the way, all these things in all different ways keep working to the benefit of the fossil fuel economy. So why? Well, if you're a fatalist and you think, wow, there's nothing that can be done, it's just the way it is, then you'll leave the fossil fuel companies alone and they can keep pumping oil out. It doesn't matter how they get you to where they get you, whether they get you to be a denier, delayer, fatalist, whatever, as long as you leave them alone, they're happy. But the point is, you have to be very careful, because you read what looks like a very credible news source, the Wall Street Journal, and you think, well, that's believable. I'm going to believe that. You just can't. In fact, I teach whole courses on climate change denial literature, and we roll up our sleeves and consider how to read it so that we can actually get to the truth. And looking for things like this, one of the first things we have to require people to do in that course is go through every source that is being cited. And you could do that here, because they do have footnotes, and that, on the one hand, to the uninitiated, somebody not really looking at this that carefully, might sound like, wow, that's really carefully researched, look at all those footnotes. Yeah, but you need to look at all those footnotes and go through them and see what's credible and what's not. And even something that ostensibly is credible, like the Wall Street Journal, you have to consider what kind of thing they're quoting from the Wall Street Journal and what's the tradition of it. And the good news is, in the era of the internet, it didn't take me long to find this particular article in Current Affairs. And I just had to, Google it in and look around, and I found it very quickly. The sad thing is, and what they're really hoping, is that you won't do any of that. And in the classes I teach, it's so obvious that sometimes, in fact, one article comes to mind by Brian Sussman, who's a radio talk show guy in the Bay Area. He wrote a book about the climate crisis. And the very first fact he quotes inaccurately and confusingly. And you just have to literally type 3 words into your browser, and you can find in the first two or three listings in Google that he's wrong. He's totally wrong. But he's relying on the fact that you won't do that you won't put those 3 words in and spend literally a minute researching. And you really have to do it with this kind of stuff. And I think you have to do it in life in general, by the way. I think there's so much disinformation, there's so much confusion out there. And hey, we're experiencing that with COVID, with things like mask wearing and all. I mean, I used to be a TV show called, what was it? The Truth is Out There. I forget the name of the TV show. The X-Files, from many years ago. And I think that was the catchphrase, the truth is out there. The truth is out there, but you just have to look for it. And sadly, though, there are people who are trying to convince you otherwise. I was just getting ready. I was reaching over to get another comment, but I think I'm going to end on that note. I didn't want to go much longer than an hour, and I think we're creeping up on an hour here. The truth is out there, but you have to find it, and you have to look carefully for it. And again, what I find so interesting from my perspective, because, the written word is what I'm a specialist in, the way you find the truth is through reading. Maybe, I'm sure there are people in the room here who actually will become climate scientists. But you're going to be a small percentage. Most of us aren't. Most of us, aren't scientists at all. And we have to rely on our ability to read through to the truth. And when you're encountering a document like this book, a text like this, that's the job, to read through to the truth. And what's so sad is and vexing and frustrating, and I should actually go through and compile all the words that people had for this, how it made them angry and frustrated and depressed, and there were dozens of words that people use, and I thought so many were really poignant. But that's the problem. We need to read through to the truth, even though this huge industry, the biggest industry on the planet, is trying to confuse us, and is directly trying to confuse us by waging a war of words. And this is part of that. That's what this document is. It's trying to win the battle of words, and it's been pretty effective. Not, again, that it's convinced people that the climate crisis isn't happening, but people pick up a book like this, and maybe they're convinced it's not happening, but if, maybe the case they're just confused. And I think that's the idea. It's to make people doubt, confuse people. It's very depressing that that's happening. It's very frustrating that we live in a world where corporations are allowed to do things like that and the government hasn't intervened. I mean, for decades, tobacco industry was selling this addictive poison targeting children, and they were allowed to do it. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's in any way right. I don't think it's right that fossil fuel industry is allowed to do what it's doing without, addressing this problem and trying to resolve it. But the biggest, I think, tool that we had, the most powerful tool that we have, I think, is being able to read through this. And then when you get to come out the other side and, your doubt is removed and you know what the problem is, then we can finally get to the point where we roll up our sleeves and figure out what to do. And, yes, it'll involve personal action, but we can't, play into the hands of the fossil fuel industry and others by, taking all the responsibility on ourselves. Some of it, sure, but we need to look squarely at them and ask and demand that they take responsibility. And since they won't do it themselves, we need to do that third thing with the activism, which is, political activism. Since they're not going to take responsibility for it, we need to put politicians in office that will require them to, that will demand them to. And that's the only thing that's going to do it. I mean, yeah, we can vote with our dollars and try to pull support away. But ultimately, you need a strong government that is strong enough to take on these corporations. And that's where, political action is important. Okay, so that's it. So the next deep dive, still depressing, we're going to look at the documentaries on doubt that we saw. Okay, so you'll see me there next time. Okay, take care.